We now come to the end of the book of Shemos, the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus is about three central themes. The first theme is the bondage and exodus from Egypt. The second theme is the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And the third theme is the construction of the Mishkan, the portable sanctuary, the tabernacle, as it's often called, in the desert. Interspersed in the third theme, you find also the narrative of the golden calf, at which time the Jewish people, in the absence of Moses, miscalculating the date of his return from Mount Sinai, had Aaron construct this golden calf, and some of them worshipped it. And when Moses returned, he shattered the tablets, then he had to go up again, and God finally forgave the Jewish people, and a way of showing that God was willing to dwell amongst them was the commandment to build the sanctuary. It's God's way of saying, I will come back to live with you. So this is how the book of Exodus is divided. The first four sections, the first four parshios as they're known, are about the bondage and the Exodus. The next two sections are about the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, followed by a litany of laws that were given at Mount Sinai. Then the next four sections are about the Mishkan, the tabernacle, including the narrative of the golden calf, which is related to the tabernacle because building the tabernacle, the Mishkan, was God's way of saying, I have forgiven you for your sin. And this Torah portion, entitled Pikudei, is about the accounting that Moses made for all the items that were contributed to the Mishkan, and also the dedication of the Mishkan, which occurred on the first day of Nisan. Now let's go through the chronology, because this is going to raise a very, very strong question. The Jewish people left Egypt in the year 2448 after creation, and they left on the 15th day of the month of Nisan. 7 weeks later, they received the Torah at Mount Sinai. Moses goes up on the mountain and comes back, and he sees the golden calf, and he shatters the tablets, and he goes back up again for another 40 days and 40 nights. And then after God had said that he would give the Jews another chance, Moses goes up for another 40 days and returns with the second set of tablets. That was Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. At that point, the next day, Moses conveys and communicates the commandment that God gave him to tell the people to contribute towards the building of this Mishkan, the sanctuary. The building of the sanctuary did not take very long. It started the day after Yom Kippur, at least the contributions, the commandment for the contributions, and was completed on the 25th day of Kislev, according to our sages. It's like 2.5 months later. But when was it dedicated? It wasn't dedicated until several months later in the month of Nisan. So you had the end of Kislev, Tevet, Shvat, Adar, and you're talking about several months later, was it dedicated? So the question is, why wasn't it dedicated right away? But before we address that question, we're taught that in the Midrash that because the 25th of Kislev was quote-unquote cheated and deprived of the honor of being the day in which the Mishkan was dedicated, God says, you know what, I will repay you. A time will come during the times of the second temple that the temple will be rededicated on the 25th day of Kislev, which is, of course, the holiday of Hanukkah. Okay, so that explains what happened, what God did to compensate, to assuage the pain of the month of Kislev. But the question still remains, why did God wait until Nisan? Why didn't he dedicate it on the 25th day of Kislev when the Mishkan was completed? So one of the answers given is that Nisan is a very special month. Nisan is the month in which Yitzchak, Isaac, was born. And therefore, God wanted the dedication of the Mishkan to occur in that month. But that only transfers the question, because the question is, why does the birth of Yitzchak warrant postponing the construction of the Mishkan? So the simple answer is that Yitzchak represents sacrifice. Yitzchak was the one who was placed on the altar during the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, when Abraham was being tested. Isaac was prepared to give his life for God. And that's essentially what brought atonement for the Jewish people. To this day, we are protected because of Isaac's sacrifice. Since the whole purpose of building the sanctuary was to bring sacrifices, offerings, as a way of atonement, it makes sense that the dedication of this temple should occur during the month in which the first sacrifice, you could say, was offered by the patriarch Isaac. But I'd like to share a deeper explanation why it was postponed for the month of Nisan, because of the birth of Isaac. What is the underlying rationale behind that? There's a passage in the Talmud that quotes a verse in Isaiah in which it explains that when Mashiach will come, we will speak to Yitzchak, to Isaac, and say to him, Ki ata avinu, you are our father. Not Abraham, not Jacob. And the Talmud explains it in a very puzzling way. The Talmud says that when God approaches Abraham and tells him at the end of days, your children have sinned, what does Abraham say? Let them be sacrificed for the sanctification of God's name. In other words, if you take it at face value, Abraham is saying, well, let them die to prove that God is the right one that will sanctify God's name. Very strange. Then God goes to Jacob, and Jacob says the same thing. Let them die for their sins, and let them sanctify God's name. But when he comes to Isaac, Isaac begins to negotiate with God until he gets God to forgive the Jewish people. So that is why the Jewish people will turn to Isaac and say, you, Isaac, ki ata, you, Avinu, you are our father. Not Abraham, not Jacob. And that's very puzzling because we know that Abraham represents and personified the trait of kindness and love. Jacob personified the trait of rachamim, of compassion. How could a loving and compassionate father say to God, instead of defending the people, saying to God that they should be sanctified by, God should be sanctified by them dying for the sanctification of God's name? That doesn't seem to square with who Abraham is and who Jacob is. And throughout Jewish literature, starting with the Bible, the Torah, continuing through the Midrash and Talmud, and in all of the later writings, the mystical and Hasidic writings, they are represented as the paragon of kindness, love, and compassion. And yet they're the ones who say, let the Jewish people be destroyed, let their children be destroyed. But in truth, that's not what they're saying. When God comes to Abraham and to Jacob and confronts them with the sins of their children, they can't deny it. Yes, that's true. They've sinned. But they say, look at what power of dedication a Jew really possesses. Even a Jew who's a sinner is willing to give his life or her life for the sanctification of God's name. Throughout Jewish history, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jews have died rather than to betray their belief in one God, rather than to show a lack of faith in God. They're willing to die. And we're not talking about saints, tzaddikim. We're not talking about holy people, people steeped in Judaism. There are so many stories of Jews who were far away, distant from Judaism. But when it came to the test, are they willing to give their lives for the belief in one God? The Jew would be prepared to die with the words of Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, God is our God, God is one, rather than even pay lip service to another religion. There's a story during the Holocaust of a very assimilated Jew who was really anti-religious. And it's a long story, I'll just mention it very briefly, that it was Yom Kippur, and the Bluzhever Rebbe, a very prominent Hasidic leader, together with some of his followers, pleaded with him that they shouldn't have to work on Yom Kippur. So he accommodated them by giving them a job of being maintenance, cleaning, and they were told that they don't have to do anything unless the Nazis come in, then they have to start working. And they were very happy with this accommodation. It's during Yom Kippur in the afternoon. They were fasting all this time, and all of a sudden the Nazis come in with a tray of delectable food, meat, potatoes, vegetables. The aroma was really so strong that any normal person would die to eat that food, especially when they were so emaciated throughout the week. And this assimilated Jew came in with the Nazis, and the Nazis say to him, I want you to order them to go eat, because none of the Jews would go approach the cart to eat. And the Nazis did this deliberately, knowing it was Yom Kippur, that they were fasting. And this assimilated Jew said to the Nazis, I'm sorry, we don't eat on Yom Kippur. It's a holy day, and we don't eat. It's a fast day. And the Nazi barked at him and said, if you don't order them to eat, I'll shoot you right now. And again he said, we Jews do not eat on Yom Kippur, and he shot him dead. And at that point, the Bluzhever Rebbe said, now I finally understood the meaning of what our sages say in the Talmud, that even the sinners of Israel are filled with mitzvahs, as a pomegranate is filled with seeds. At any rate, this is something that happened throughout Jewish history, and we pray that it never has to happen again, that Jews are willing to die rather than betray the belief in one God. So even the Jew who doesn't observe anything, even the Jew who commits many transgressions, Abraham and Jacob were arguing, you have to spare them, you have to bring them redemption because of who they are internally, which defines their true essence. That's the love and kindness and compassion of Abraham and Jacob. God says, no, that's not enough. Because we're dealing with the Messianic age. When we come to the Messianic age, the whole purpose is that God's presence is felt in the world, not just internally, not just in a time of crisis, not just in a time of persecution when the deepest soul powers of a Jew come to the fore. But I need Jews who are living as Jews, Jews who practice Judaism, Jews who translate their inner soul into their behavior. And that's where Isaac, who represents judgment, who represents justice, scrutiny, and delving deeper into the psyche of every person. Isaac was a person who used to dig wells. The idea that digging wells metaphorically is searching for the life source of water and bringing it to the fore, not leaving it down there, deep down. You don't accomplish anything by digging to find a well 100 feet beneath the surface. You want the water to come up. And that's what Isaac was able to do. And Isaac says to God, God, it's not just their spiritual potential that you have to recognize, but even on the surface, every Jew deserves to be judged favorably. And as I just mentioned before, the Talmud says, even the sinners of Israel are filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate is filled with seeds. It's not just deep down, it's on the surface. Every Jew has so many mitzvahs, and you have to recognize it. Let's negotiate. They're not perfect, true, but they're not just someone who has it deep down. It's like if your kid at a PTA meeting who hasn't really behaved that much during the year, and the teacher says to the parent, your child has potential. Right away you say, 1 second, I'm not happy with it. I know what that means. Of course the child has potential. Every child has potential. I want you to say to me that your child has behaved, your child was learning, your child has expressed that potential in reality, not perfect. And that's what Isaac was able to do. And that's why he's the one to whom we will say, Ki ato avinu, you are our father. Now we can understand why the Mishkan's dedication was delayed until the month of Nisan, the month in which Isaac was born, Yitzchak was born. Because building the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the sanctuary, was not just a place for God to dwell distant from the people. The idea was he should dwell amongst us. When you come in the presence of a king, you are dressed properly. Well, our mitzvahs are called our garments. So building a Mishkan, relying on the fact that every Jew who enters there, deep down, this Jew has a spiritual desire to get closer to God, but that desire has not manifested itself. It hasn't expressed itself. And you're not wearing clean clothing. You're not wearing beautiful clothing. In the Mishkan, it's not enough to have a good soul deep down. You have to manifest that soul. And that's why the Mishkan was delayed to the month in which Yitzchak was born, because he personifies not just relying on potential, but actualizing that potential so that your garments, spiritually speaking, are clean and perfect. And with that, with Isaac's intervention with God, that we will then say to him very soon with the coming of Mashiach, Ki ata avinu, you are our Father. You recognize that we're not just good deep down, but that good is also a real good, a revealed good, a good that everyone could see, that we're all wearing these beautiful garments with which we will greet Mashiach and see the rebuilding of the third Beit HaMikdash, Holy Temple, imminently.